Hi guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about how to form a thesis statement. Now, a thesis statement is something that you're going to want to take a little bit of time on. Now, when I say a little bit, I mean more than you guys usually do when it comes to teachers asking you to think. A thesis statement is what drives your paper. It is the one sentence that tells the reader what you're going to write about and what your point of view is. So if this is something that you literally take 10 seconds to think about and you jot something down and think, hey, Mrs. Massey won't know the difference, and neither will anybody else that reads my paper. Guess what? We so will. So this little presentation is to try to help you go through the process carefully and come up with something that is valuable for your paper. So what you're going to learn is first what a thesis statement is. Some of you may already know this, but I want to take a little bit of time to explain again what it means to have a thesis statement and kind of how it relates to a research paper. Next, we're going to talk about how it works in your paper and how it gives your paper focus. And finally, we're going to go through the process of discovering and refining a thesis statement for your first draft. Now, I want to say this now, and I'll say it again. Your thesis statement may change between right now and when you turn in the final draft of your paper. That is 100% okay. Your thesis statement is supposed to be a process, and based on new research that you find or questions that you get asked through the process, it's supposed to change. In fact, I don't know of a single time when I've written a paper that my thesis statement has stayed the same the entire time. So even with myself, and I've written a lot of papers, I have never stuck with my first draft. So here we go. What does a thesis statement do? First, it tells the reader how you interpret the significance of the subject. So each of you are writing on a religion that is found in Asia. Okay, you need to ask yourself, what is significant about this religion? It's not just that people, worship that way over in a different part of the world. It's not that the book told you to or Mrs. Massey told you to. It's how is this particular religion, how does it affect the world? How is it different from the other religions you've studied? You may only know a little bit about how it's different, but you need to ask yourself why. What would draw people into this religion? The second thing it does is it is a roadmap for your paper. Your paper needs some kind of guidance. You can't just say, I'm going to talk about Buddhism. You need to say what you are talking about with Buddhism. So we're going to talk about how your thesis statement should have at least three distinct parts. So I'm going to talk about this piece of Buddhism, and this piece of Buddhism, and this last thing about Buddhism. Now, the next thing you should do is directly answer the questions asked of you, and you need to look back on your original assignment sheet to see those. And finally, your thesis statement is the last sentence of your introduction. So your introduction needs to draw the reader in, and the last sentence says, boom, this is what I'm going to write on. So next, how do you get a thesis statement? Well, there's several steps that you need to go through, and each one of them requires you, one more time, it requires you to spend time kind of thinking about your note cards and thinking about how they all relate together. So first, what you're going to be doing in class for Thursday and for Friday is you're going to collect your evidence. Your evidence is simply the note cards that you are making, and it's all the information that you can find about your religion. You just need to make note cards, put them into Noodle Tools, and then you're going to sit back and study them. You need to ask yourself, are there any relationships that you see with the information? Okay, is there something unique about their origins? Is there something unique about how they worship, who they worship? Is there something unique about what their goals are for humanity? So in the Christian faith, one of the goals is to make sure that everyone accepts Christ so that you can get into heaven. That might not necessarily be the goal of your particular religion. So you need to think about what the relationships are and how they are significant to those that worship that way. The next thing you need to do is jot down several ideas for your thesis statement. So what I like to do is when I'm studying things, so let's take Christianity for example, I would write down they have one God that's in three parts. The people worship and they pray and they sing when they go to worship. They follow the prophet Jesus. Things like that so that I can make like big topics, and then I can study them and I can go, okay, this is the basic idea of Christianity. So when you jot down your ideas, you're going to, again, study them. Now, I don't mean spend 10 minutes. I mean, stare at them for a little bit, think about how they all work together, and try to condense things down into one sentence. And when you read that sentence, ask yourself, did you clarify the relationships more or less than you thought you had before? Now, how do I know if my thesis is strong? Oh yes, I know there's a typo there. But, you know, we're just going to look past that because I'm already recording. Okay, you need to ask yourself to figure out if your thesis is strong. So 1, did I answer the question asked of me? So questions asked of you are, what's the basic point of your religion? Did you address that? How do people worship? Did you address that? Again, you need to reread the prompt that I gave you. There were 3 basic questions that you need to answer with your religion. And you need to make sure your thesis statement attacks that. The next thing, and this is probably one of the, it's not very difficult, but it's one of the really confusing things, is did you pass the so what test? Okay, if someone reads your thesis statement and they're kind of like, so what? Why should I care about this religion? If that's the first thing that pops into their head, your thesis statement did not address things in a way that makes your audience want to keep reading. Okay? Or it addresses it in a way that kind of doesn't tell you anything about the religion or what you're going to explain. If you don't tell the reader what you're going to explain, they have no reason to read your paper because you didn't take the time to do it in the first place, and it just sounds like it makes things up. So 1, did you answer the questions I asked of you? And 2, is anybody going to ask you so what? So let's go through this process together. So what I have done is I have made note cards on the religion Jainism. Okay, Jainism was not on your list, and it was because I wanted to use it as an example as we go through this. Now, without reading all of my note cards, let me go through a little bit of it. So first, it's very similar to Hinduism and Buddhism. However, they have no gods. They don't worship any kind of deity. So like Buddhism, you know, they follow the teachings of the prophet Buddha. Hinduism, they have a whole bunch of different gods. So Jainism is unique in that they have principles down here that guide their thinking, but they don't worship any gods. They basically strive to be better people. Their main focus is to create a healthy universe by leading a harmless existence and leading an existence that makes sure everyone, every living thing, plants, animals, people, that they move towards having them live a harmless life so that they can achieve liberation. Now that brings me to the reincarnation. They believe in reincarnation, but they believe that you'll be reincarnated and you strive to be reincarnated so that you can be liberated in life. And that means that you are free from any kind of harm because you have lived a very good life. Karma has been good to you. You know, you don't have any negative deeds. So that's the essence of Jainism. So when I'm studying this, I'm kind of looking at my cards. Now I put them into 3 different piles. So how the religion's organized, kind of how their main goals. They have very specific principles that they live by. So I got the principles listed and why they're vegetarians, and then their thoughts on reincarnation. Now, really, I should have a whole lot more fact cards, but this is an example that shows you probably how your fact cards are going to look by the time I ask you to make a thesis statement. So let's go back here. So we've thought about Jainism a little bit. So let's say our first example is, so we looked at our note cards. So can I put them into groups? I did that. So they're grouped by their topics. What do those groups tell me about the relationships? And can I come up with a statement or 2 about the religion? So I've come up with some examples on the next slide. So first, I said Jainism is a unique religion. Okay, it's cool. It's rare. It's godless. You know, people are vegetarians. People have principles that they live by. You know, Christians have 10 commandments, but those things are things that God asks us to do. They just have principles. So it's like, are they the same? Are they different? And I kind of thought about that for a while, and I'm like, all right, it's unique, but does this pass the so what test? Can somebody sit there and go, okay, so what? It's unique. Christianity's unique. Islam's unique. You didn't tell me anything about Jainism, lady. So I needed to sit back and think of a new version that would tell people a little bit more about the religion. So then I'm like, all right, so they have a lot of cool attributes about them. So my next attempt was Jainism has many characteristics that people like in a religion. Now, even though that's really true, did I tell you that about any of the characteristics that I was going to discuss in my paper? Think about it, did I? No. I just said that there were some. Okay, the reader is still going to go, okay, so what? What characteristics, lady? You're not giving me enough information. So finally, I came up with a three-part thesis. So Jainism is similar to Hinduism and Buddhism. So I'm telling the reader that I'm giving it some background information. But it is different in that it is primarily concerned with the welfare of every being in the universe. So part one. It strives for liberation instead of enlightenment. Part two. And it does not have any gods. So the three things I'm telling the reader I'm going to discuss is how they maintain welfare of the universe, how they want liberation, and why they don't have any gods. So I'm giving my paper a very specific focus, and I'm not going to talk about anything other than that because it doesn't fit in my thesis. So let's recap. A thesis statement is what drives the focus of your paper. Okay, if your thesis doesn't include it, it shouldn't be in your paper. And a bad thesis will make the reader very confused. Just like if I said Jainism is a unique religion, the reader doesn't know what I'm talking about. They don't know what I'm going to describe, and that frustrates some people, so you need to eliminate confusion. Second thing, a thesis statement introduces what you will discuss. My final thesis gave 3 specific things that I was going to discuss. Yours needs to have something similar. And it also took a stand on the issue and indicates what I'm going to explain in the paragraphs. Okay, my stand was they wanted good welfare for everybody, they wanted liberation, and they have no gods. So now, whether or not my stand changes by the time I make my final draft, that will be up to me later on after I do a little more research. But for right now, that's what I'm sticking to. So you need to try to have 3 main topics one more time. So obviously I'm hitting on this a lot, so you need to pay attention. So like in our example, I said they wanted welfare for all, they wanted liberation, and they have no gods. So these are the 3 parts of my paper. What I would expect to see if I actually wrote it was to have an introductory paragraph with my thesis statement as the last sentence. I'll have 1 short paragraph on the concept of welfare, 1 short paragraph on liberation, and 1 short paragraph on why they have no gods. So, and then a conclusion. So my paper would be 5 small paragraphs, all explaining the concept of Jainism. All right, guys, so I hope that you have learned something from this little video, and I will see you in class tomorrow.